Vivian Sterling stood at the center of the boardroom, 200 faces staring back at her. The projector behind her displayed the damning evidence her brother had just presented. A contract, bank transfers, every secret she had buried for 11 months, now exposed under fluorescent lights. Preston Sterling smiled from across the table, the smile of a man who had already won. Vivian felt her knees weaken. She had no allies left, no defense, no way out. Then the double doors swung open. Nolan Prescott walked in, his jaw set, his eyes locked on hers. And beside him, holding his hand with the confidence of someone who understood far more than any 7-year-old should, was his daughter Calla. The little girl looked around the room full of executives in expensive suits. She looked at her father. She looked at Vivian. Then she spoke, her small voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Why does everyone want to send my mom away?" The room went still, and Vivian Sterling, who had spent her entire life never crying in public, felt tears spill down her cheeks. 11 months earlier, the office was empty at 9:45 on a Monday night. Nolan Prescott sat hunched over his laptop in the dim glow of his desk lamp, typing another forgettable tagline for a product nobody would remember. He was 35 years old and felt twice that. 5 years of raising a daughter alone will do that to a man. His phone buzzed. The daycare. Miss Turner's tired voice told him that Calla had a fever. If it didn't break by morning, he would need to pick her up early. He said he would be there. He always was. Nolan hung up and rubbed his eyes. The exhaustion ran deeper than sleep could fix. 5 years since Elise died. 5 years of drowning in medical bills that kept multiplying no matter how many extra shifts he worked. 5 years of holding everything together with duct tape and desperate hope while his daughter asked questions he couldn't answer. He saved the document, shut down his computer, grabbed his jacket. The hallway was dark, the building nearly abandoned. He turned the corner too fast and collided with someone coming the other way. A leather portfolio slipped from her hands. Papers scattered across the polished floor like fallen leaves. Nolan dropped to his knees immediately, gathering the documents with hurried apologies. The woman crouched across from him, her movements precise and controlled. He looked up and recognized her instantly. Vivian Sterling, Executive Vice President, the kind of woman who commanded silence when she entered a room and never needed to explain why. She was 30 years old, beautiful in the way that sharp things are beautiful, and she had never once spoken to anyone below the executive floor. Their hands reached for the portfolio at the same time. They didn't touch, but the air between them pulled tight. Nolan handed her the folder. Vivian straightened, her face a mask of polished indifference. She thanked him without warmth and turned to leave. That should have been the end of it. But Nolan noticed something she had missed. A sealed envelope, cream-colored and embossed, half hidden beneath a filing cabinet near the wall. He picked it up and called out to her. Vivian stopped, turned back. Nolan jogged toward her, holding the envelope out like it might shatter if he gripped it too hard. Vivian took it. Then she opened her purse and pulled out 5 crisp $100 bills. She held them toward him. Nolan stared at the money, then at her. He shook his head. "I was just returning something that wasn't mine. You don't have to pay me for that." Vivian studied him like he was a puzzle she hadn't expected to encounter. A crease formed between her brows. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." He walked away, leaving her standing there in the hallway with the money still in her hand. What Nolan didn't know was that Vivian Sterling never forgot things like that. She went back to her office and pulled up the employee directory. Nolan Prescott, copywriter, lower tier, widower. 1 daughter, age 7. Financial history, catastrophic. $120,000 in debt. No corporate alliances, no connections to her brother Preston. She leaned back in her chair, processing. Preston had been circling her position for years, quietly dismantling everything she tried to build. He was the golden child, the one their father had groomed since birth to take over, the one who had been promised everything, only to watch it all go to his sister because of a last-minute change to the will. The clock was ticking. Her father's will demanded she be married before her 30th birthday, or control of Sterling Corp would transfer to Preston. She needed someone clean, someone she could control, someone with nothing to lose and everything to gain. Nolan Prescott fit the profile perfectly. 7 days later, Nolan received an email from Human Resources. He was being summoned to the 36th floor at 9 in the morning. No explanation, no context, just a meeting request with Vivian Sterling's name attached. He read it 3 times, trying to figure out what he had done wrong. He showed up at 8:55 wearing the only suit he owned that still fit. The 36th floor was glass and steel, all sharp edges and cold light. A receptionist directed him to a conference room at the end of the hall. He walked in and found Vivian sitting at the head of a long table, her posture perfect, her face revealing nothing. She gestured to the chair across from her. Nolan sat. Vivian didn't waste time. She told him she had reviewed his employment record. She said he was competent, reliable, and unremarkable. Then she said something that made his stomach drop. She needed him to do something for her, something that had nothing to do with his job. She told him about her father's will. The company had been left to her, but there was a clause. The person controlling Sterling Corp had to be married. If Vivian didn't marry before her 30th birthday in 11 months, control would transfer to Preston. Nolan asked why she didn't just marry someone she actually knew. Vivian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The marriage clause wasn't about stability, it was about control. My father had already picked out who I was supposed to marry, Preston's college roommate, a man 20 years older than me with connections my father wanted to exploit. She paused, and for just a moment, something flickered behind her eyes. When I refused, he told me I would never succeed without a man to guide me. He died 3 months later, and suddenly the clause wasn't about his choice anymore. It was about mine, and Preston has been waiting for me to fail ever since. Nolan absorbed this. The picture was becoming clearer. She said she needed a husband, not a real one, a contract, 12 months, no emotion, no complications, just a performance. Nolan asked why him. Because you have no reason to refuse. She had done her research. He owed over $120,000 in debt from his wife's final months. He was 3 months behind on rent. His daughter's daycare was barely covered. Vivian could fix all of that. She could erase his debt, double his salary, provide health insurance, set up an education fund for Calla. All he had to do was play the role. Nolan asked what playing the role meant. It meant moving into her penthouse, attending family dinners, posing for photographs, convincing her brother and the board that they were a real couple. Nolan asked the question that had been sitting in his throat since the moment she started talking. So, are we sharing a bed? Vivian's expression didn't waver. Only when necessary. Only when we need to convince someone who matters. Nolan told her he needed 24 hours. Vivian said that was fine. She handed him a folder with the terms written out in legal language he barely understood and walked him to the door. That night, Nolan sat in Calla's room and watched her sleep. She was small for her age, her breathing soft and steady, her stuffed elephant tucked under her chin, the same one Elise had given her the day she was born. He thought about the life he was giving her, the cramped apartment with the leaky faucet, the second-hand clothes that never quite fit right, the constant fear that one bad month would put them on the street. He thought about Elise, the way she used to laugh at his terrible jokes, the way she would stay up late working on cases she believed in, even when nobody else did, the way she had looked at him in those final weeks, like she was trying to memorize his face. She had been a researcher at Sterling Corp. a good one, the kind who asked questions nobody wanted answered. And then one rainy Tuesday, a car ran a red light and everything ended. He thought about what Vivian was offering: stability, security, a future where Calla could go to college without drowning in the same debt that was slowly suffocating him. He picked up his phone and typed out a message. "I'll do it, but my daughter stays out of it. No publicity, no involvement." Vivian replied within 2 minutes. "Agreed." Nolan set the phone down and closed his eyes. He had just sold himself. He wasn't sure if that made him smart or desperate. Probably both. The contract was signed 3 days later in a lawyer's office downtown. Everything was there: the money, the timeline, the rules, no emotional attachment, no physical relationship unless required for appearances, termination clause after 12 months. He signed his name at the bottom and watched Vivian do the same. She shook his hand. It felt like sealing a business deal, which he supposed it was. He moved into the penthouse on a Friday. The place was cold and immaculate: white marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, furniture that looked like it had been staged for a magazine shoot and never touched by human hands. Vivian showed him to a guest room at the far end of the hall. She told him the rules again: no crossing boundaries, no personal questions, no expectations beyond what was written in the contract. Nolan set his bag down and looked around. The room was bigger than his entire apartment. He felt like an intruder in someone else's life. That Sunday, they attended their first family dinner at the Sterling estate. Preston was there. He was handsome in the way that expensive things are handsome: sharp suit, perfect hair, a smile that never quite reached his eyes. The golden child, now 42 and still bitter about being passed over. He walked over and shook Nolan's hand, his grip just a little too tight, held just a little too long. "This is a surprise. I didn't know my sister was seeing anyone." Vivian's voice stayed calm. "We kept it quiet." Preston raised an eyebrow. "How did you two meet?" "At the office," Nolan said. "And what do you do at the office?" Vivian cut in smoothly. "He's in marketing." Preston nodded slowly. His gaze lingered on Nolan like a predator assessing whether something was worth hunting. "I see. Well, I hope you understand what you're getting into. This family isn't kind to people who don't belong." Dinner was stiff and formal. Nolan sat beside Vivian, his hand resting on the back of her chair because that's what a husband would do. At one point, Vivian placed her hand over his, a brief touch that looked natural but felt rehearsed. Preston watched them from across the table the entire time. On the drive home, Vivian stared out the window at the passing city lights. "He doesn't believe us." Nolan asked how she knew. "Because Preston never believes anything I do is real." The first 3 weeks in the penthouse felt like living in a museum. Vivian left for the office before Nolan woke up. She returned after he had already eaten dinner alone at the kitchen island. They exchanged maybe 10 sentences a day, most of them logistical. That was the extent of their marriage. Then one Thursday night, the power went out. A storm rolled through the city, knocking out electricity across half of downtown. The penthouse went dark just after 10. Vivian came into the living room holding her phone like a flashlight. Nolan found 2 wine glasses and poured them each a drink. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, listening to the rain hammer against the windows. The city below reduced to scattered emergency lights and the occasional flash of lightning. The silence stretched. Then Vivian spoke. "Why did you really agree to this?" Nolan stared into his wine glass, watching the dark liquid catch the glow from his phone screen. "You already know why. I know what the contract says. I want to know what you were thinking when you signed it." He considered deflecting, giving her the easy answer. But something about the darkness made honesty feel safer. "I was thinking about my daughter, about what kind of father lets his kid grow up poor when he has a chance to fix it. About all the things I promised Elise I would give Calla that I haven't been able to deliver. Do you regret it? I don't know yet. He turned to look at her, her face half shadowed in the dim light. Do you? Vivian shook her head. I would do whatever it takes to keep Preston from winning. He's been trying to destroy me since we were children. This is just the latest battlefield. The power stayed out for 2 more hours. They talked in the dark about things neither of them had planned to share. Vivian told him about growing up in the Sterling house, about being invisible until it was convenient for her not to be, about a father who groomed Preston for greatness while treating her as an afterthought, a backup plan in case the real heir failed. Nolan told her about Elise, about her passion for her work, her dedication to uncovering things that didn't add up, about the rainy Tuesday that ended everything, about the morning Kala asked when Mommy was coming back, and he had to explain that Mommy wasn't coming back ever. When the lights flickered on, they both blinked against the sudden brightness. Vivian stood, smoothing her clothes like she was putting her armor back on. I should get back to work. She paused at the doorway, looked back at him. Thank you for talking. Nolan nodded. Anytime. She disappeared down the hall, and he sat alone on the couch, wondering when this had stopped feeling like a transaction. The following Saturday, Nolan mentioned over breakfast that he was taking Kala to the park. Vivian surprised him by asking if she could come. I want to see what your life looks like outside this apartment. Nolan hesitated, then said yes. Kala was on the swings when Vivian arrived. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater. No makeup. Her hair pulled back. She looked younger than Nolan had ever seen her. More human. Kala noticed her first, dragging her feet to stop the swing's momentum. Daddy, who's that lady? A friend. Vivian walked over and crouched down to Kala's level. Hi, I'm Vivian. Kala studied her with the unfiltered intensity that only children possess. Her head tilted to one side, her eyes narrowing slightly. You're pretty, but your eyes are sad. Vivian's breath caught. Mommy's eyes used to be sad like that, Kala continued, her voice matter-of-fact in the way children discuss impossible things. Before she had to go away, Daddy said she was sad because she didn't want to leave us. Nolan's chest tightened. Kala tilted her head the other way, still examining Vivian like she was solving a puzzle. Are you sad because you have to leave someone too? Vivian opened her mouth, but no words came out. Then Kala reached out and took her hand. It's okay. I can give you a hug if you need one. Hugs make the sad go away. Mommy told me that. Vivian knelt in the grass and let this 7-year-old girl wrap small arms around her neck. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she let herself cry in front of another person. Nolan stood a few feet away, watching something shift in the air between them. When they finally separated, Kala kept hold of Vivian's hand. Do you want to see me go really high on the swings? Daddy always pushes me super high. Vivian wiped her eyes with her free hand. I would love that. They spent 2 hours in the park. Kala showed Vivian her favorite spots, explained the complex social dynamics of the playground with deadly seriousness, and declared that Vivian gave pretty good hugs for a grown-up. On the walk back to the car, Kala grabbed both their hands, positioning herself between them. This is nice, she said. It's like having a family. Neither Nolan nor Vivian knew how to respond. 2 weeks later, Vivian said they needed wedding photos. For the family, for the board, we need proof this looks real. The photographer met them at a studio downtown. White backdrop, soft lighting, instructions that felt like choreography for emotions they weren't supposed to have. Stand closer, look at each other, smile like you mean it. Nolan put his arm around Vivian's waist. She leaned into him. The photographer asked her to rest her head on his shoulder. She hesitated, then did. Now look at each other. They turned. Nolan looked into Vivian's eyes and saw something he hadn't expected. Vulnerability, uncertainty, the same questions he saw in the mirror every morning. The camera flashed. Vivian stepped back immediately. the moment shattering like dropped glass. She busied herself adjusting her dress, not meeting his eyes. On the drive home, neither of them spoke, but later that night, when Nolan saw the printed proofs, he understood why she had retreated so quickly. In the pictures, they didn't look like two people pretending. They looked like two people terrified of what they might be becoming. Preston made his move 2 weeks later. He called Nolan and asked to meet. Just the two of them. Coffee, casual. Nolan agreed, even though every instinct told him it was a trap. He set his phone to record before walking into the upscale coffee shop, where Preston was already waiting in a corner booth. Preston got straight to the point. I know everything. The contract, the debt, the payments, the timeline. He laid it out piece by piece, his voice calm and reasonable, like they were discussing quarterly projections rather than the demolition of two lives. I don't blame you for taking the deal. Anyone in your position would have. But this isn't going to end well for you. When Vivian falls, you fall with her. He slid an envelope across the table. $200,000. Walk away now, and I'll make sure the contract stays buried. No one will ever know. You go back to your life. Keep the money Vivian already gave you. Move on. Nolan let the silence stretch. Let Preston think he was considering the offer. His eyes stayed on the envelope, fat with cash and false promises. Think about your daughter, Preston continued, his voice dropping to something almost conspiratorial. She needs stability, not a father caught up in my family's war. Nolan picked up the envelope, felt its weight, then set it back down on Preston's side of the table. I appreciate the offer, he stood, but I'm going to pass. Preston's polished smile flickered for just a moment. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. Nolan walked out, leaving Preston alone with his bribe and his fury. That night he played Vivian the recording. Why didn't you take the money? She asked when it finished, her voice barely above a whisper. Nolan looked at her across the kitchen island, the city lights glittering behind her like a false sky. Because that's not who I want to be. Not in front of my daughter, and not... He stopped himself. Not what? Vivian pressed. He held her gaze. Not in front of you. Something shifted in her expression. Something neither of them was ready to name. The week before the emergency board meeting, a woman approached Nolan outside Cala's school. She was in her 60s, gray-haired, with the nervous energy of someone who had been carrying a heavy secret for too long. She pressed an envelope into his hands before he could react. I worked with your wife, she said, her voice trembling. Elise was my friend. I was too scared to come forward 5 years ago. But I can't stay silent anymore. Not when I see what Preston is doing. She glanced around like she expected someone to be watching. Your wife sent you a file before she died, an encrypted file. She told me the password was something only your daughter would know. She said it was her insurance policy in case something happened to her. Before Nolan could ask any questions, the woman was already walking away. Who are you? He called after her. She didn't turn back. Someone who should have been braver a long time ago. That night, after Calla was asleep, Nolan sat alone in his old apartment and opened the envelope. Inside were documents, financial records, email logs, a timeline of events from 5 years ago. His hands trembled as memories flooded back. 5 years ago, a week before the accident, Elise had sent him an encrypted file with a strange note. If anything happens to me, open this. The password is our most special day. You'll know which one. I love you. He had tried to open it hundreds of times in the grief-soaked months after her death, their wedding anniversary, the day they met, the day they bought their first apartment, the day they found out she was pregnant. None of them worked. Eventually, he convinced himself that Elise, exhausted and overworked in those final weeks, had simply confused the dates. That the file was probably just work documents, that it didn't matter anymore because she was gone and nothing could bring her back. He had buried the file in a folder he never opened, along with the wedding photos and the ultrasound images and all the other things that hurt too much to look at. But now, holding evidence that suggested Elise's death wasn't an accident, the old woman's words echoed in his mind. Something only your daughter would know. Not their special day, Kala's special day. He went to his daughter's room. She was still awake, hugging her elephant. Hey, sweetheart, can I ask you something? Sure, Daddy. Do you remember what Mommy used to say was the most special day? Kala didn't hesitate. Her face lit up with the certainty of treasured memory. My birthday. Mommy always said my birthday was the day she really started living. She said everything before me was just practice. Nolan's heart stopped. He kissed Kala's forehead, told her he loved her, and went back to his laptop. Found the old encrypted file, typed in Kala's birth date with shaking fingers. The file opened. Inside were emails between Raymond Sterling and the former CFO, documenting years of pension fund embezzlement, transfer records, cover-up payments, and one email from Preston Sterling, sent to his father the day after Elise's accident. Is the problem handled? Nolan sat in the dark for a long time, feeling the ground shift beneath everything he thought he knew. His wife hadn't died in an accident. She had been killed because she discovered the truth, and the family he had married into was responsible. When Vivian came home that night, Nolan was waiting in the living room. The documents were spread across the coffee table. Vivian looked at them. Her face went pale. How long have you known? Nolan's voice was steady but cold. 2 years, since I took over the company and found what my father had done. And you never told me. I didn't know how. She pressed her hands together to stop them from shaking. I didn't know if you would ever forgive me. I didn't know if I could forgive myself. I've been trying to make it right. Paying the families of everyone my father hurt. Funding scholarships. I paid your medical bills anonymously. I thought if I could fix enough of it. You thought you could buy absolution? I thought I could do something, anything, besides just living with the guilt of being his daughter. Nolan stood, walked to the window. The city stretched out below them, indifferent to the weight of what was happening in this room. I need time. He grabbed his jacket and walked out, but he didn't go home. He drove to the FBI field office downtown, walked in at 11 at night, told them he had evidence of corporate fraud, embezzlement, and vehicular homicide. They took his statement until 3 in the morning. They told him to go to the board meeting, to act normal. They would handle the rest. He went back to his old apartment after that, held Kala while she slept. Around midnight, she woke up. Daddy, why are we here? What about our new house? What about Vivian? It's complicated, sweetheart. Kala sat up, suddenly very awake, hugging her elephant tight. Did you and Vivian have a fight? Something like that. She processed this in silence for a moment. Then she spoke. Mommy told me something before she went away. She said that sometimes grown-ups do wrong things for right reasons. And the best people are the ones who know they did wrong and try to fix it. Nolan felt tears building behind his eyes. Mommy also said that one day you would meet someone who makes you happy again. And when you did, I shouldn't let you be scared, because being scared makes people run away from good things. She looked at him with 7-year-old wisdom that cut straight to his heart. I think Vivian is the good thing, Daddy. She looks at you the way Mommy used to, like you're the most important person in the whole world. Nolan pulled his daughter close and let the tears fall. The emergency board meeting convened Thursday at 10 in the morning. Preston had prepared everything: the contract, the financial transfers, the evidence of what he called fraud. He stood at the head of the conference table, laying out his case with the confidence of a man who had been waiting his whole life for this moment. My sister entered into a fraudulent marriage contract to circumvent our father's will. She paid a low-level employee to pretend to be her husband. This is deception at the highest level. It calls into question her fitness to lead this company. The board members exchanged glances. 200 people watched from the gallery, shareholders and executives who had come to witness either a coronation or an execution. Vivian sat alone at the far end of the table. She had no defense, no allies, no way out. Preston smiled. I move that Vivian Sterling be removed from her position, effective immediately. The board chair, Harrison Caldwell, opened his mouth to call for a vote, and then the double doors swung open. Nolan walked in. Beside him, holding his hand, was Calla. The room went silent. Nolan walked straight to the front, past the shocked faces, past Preston's confident smirk beginning to falter. My name is Nolan Prescott. Everything Preston just said about the contract is true. I was paid to pretend to be Vivian's husband. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. But that's not the whole story. He pulled out a USB drive and handed it to Harrison Caldwell. 5 years ago, my wife Elise was investigating financial irregularities at this company. She discovered that Raymond Sterling had been embezzling from the employee pension fund for over a decade. 1 week later, she was killed in a hit and run that was ruled an accident. The room went deathly quiet. On this drive, you'll find emails between Raymond Sterling and his CFO documenting the fraud, transfer records, cover-up payments, and an email from Preston Sterling to his father, sent the day after my wife's death, asking if the problem had been handled. Preston's face drained of color. Vivian didn't know about any of this until 2 years ago, when she took over the company and discovered what her father had done. She's been quietly compensating victims ever since. She chose me for this contract because she felt she owed me something she could never repay. He looked at Vivian across the room. But somewhere along the way, this stopped being about debt, or guilt, or contracts. Calla tugged on his hand. Can I say something, Daddy? Before he could respond, she walked toward Vivian. Every eye in the room followed her. She climbed into Vivian's lap and turned to face the crowd of executives and board members and shareholders. Vivian is a good person, she said, her small voice carrying across the silent room. She makes my daddy smile again. She gives me hugs when I miss my mommy. She reads me stories and makes funny voices for all the characters. She pointed at Preston. That man is mean. I can tell. Mommy taught me how to see when people are mean inside. He has mean eyes. A few people in the gallery stifled shocked laughter. Calla turned back to the board. Good people sometimes make mistakes, but that doesn't make them bad. My mommy told me that, and my mommy was the smartest person ever. She looked at Vivian, her small hand reaching up to touch her cheek. You're not bad. You're my mom now, and nobody gets to send my mom away. Vivian wrapped her arms around Calla and sobbed. The room remained frozen. Harrison Caldwell cleared his throat. I think we need to review this new evidence before proceeding. Preston stood abruptly, his composure cracking. This is absurd. You can't seriously believe. Sit down, Preston. The voice came from the back of the room. 2 men in dark suits were walking through the doors, federal badges visible on their belts. Preston Sterling, you're wanted for questioning regarding your involvement in a 5-year-old vehicular homicide and conspiracy to commit corporate fraud. Preston's lawyer tried to intervene. It didn't help. As Preston was escorted out of the boardroom, past 200 witnesses, past the employees he had tried to manipulate, past the sister he had tried to destroy, nobody said a word. The silence was louder than any verdict. 1 year later, the park was golden with autumn leaves. Nolan sat on the same bench where Calla had first met Vivian. His wife, his real wife now, sat beside him, a wedding ring on her finger, a gentle curve to her belly beneath her sweater. Calla ran through the leaves, laughing, chasing pigeons that refused to cooperate with her elaborate capture plans. Vivian leaned her head against Nolan's shoulder. Do you remember the first question you asked when I proposed the contract? Nolan smiled. Whether we'd be sharing a bed. And now? He kissed the top of her head. Now I can't imagine sleeping without you. Calla ran back to them, breathless and grinning, leaves stuck in her hair. She put one hand on Nolan's knee and one hand on Vivian's belly. When the baby comes, I'm going to teach it everything. How to find good people, how to spot mean ones, how to give hugs that make the sad go away. Vivian pulled her close. You're going to be the best big sister in the world. I know, Calla said matter-of-factly. Mommy told me I would be. Before she went away, she said someday I'd have a new family, and I had to take care of everyone, because that's what big sisters do. Nolan felt tears sting his eyes. She knew. Calla nodded solemnly. She said you would find someone who makes your heart happy again. She said when you did, I should love her too, because Mommy wanted us to be happy. That was her last wish. Vivian was crying too now. Calla looked at both of them with exasperation. Why are you both crying? I said happy things. Nolan laughed through his tears. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're happy too. That's weird, Calla said. Yeah, Nolan agreed, pulling both of them close. It kind of is. They sat together as the sun set over the park, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. A father who had lost everything and found it again. A woman who had spent her whole life being invisible and finally felt seen. And a 7-year-old girl who understood love better than either of them ever had. That night after Calla was asleep, Nolan and Vivian stood by the window of their penthouse, looking out at the city lights. You know, Vivian said softly, when I first proposed that contract, I thought I was being strategic, calculating, using you to solve a problem. And now? She turned to face him, her eyes bright in the reflected glow of the city. Now I realize you were never the solution to my problem. You were the answer to a question I didn't know I was asking. What question? She took his hands in hers. Whether I deserve to be happy, whether someone like me, with a family like mine, with all that blood on our hands, could ever have something good. Nolan cupped her face in his hands. You're not your father, Vivian. You're not Preston. You're the woman who tried to make things right when it would have been so much easier to look away. You're the woman my daughter calls Mom. You're the woman I love. He kissed her softly. So, Mrs. Prescott, are we sharing a bed tonight? Vivian smiled against his lips. Tonight, and every night, for the rest of our lives. Sometimes the things that start as lies become the truest things we know. Sometimes the people we hire become the people we can't live without. Sometimes a 7-year-old girl sees what 2 broken adults are too scared to see for themselves. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find your family in the last place you ever expected. For Nolan and Vivian Prescott, home wasn't the penthouse with its marble floors and stunning views. Home wasn't a contract or a company or a name. Home was a little girl who believed in hugs and happy endings. Home was choosing each other every single day, long after the contract had turned to dust. Home was knowing that the question, are we sharing a bed, had become the most beautiful answer either of them had ever found. Yes, always, forever.